Chat GPT passes exams from law and business schools. Yeah, great. But what does it know about Adobe Illustrator? Hi and welcome to the Vector Garden YouTube channel. In this video we are going to take a look at Chat GPT and whether it knows anything about Adobe Illustrator. Why should you care? Well, artificial intelligence gets built into search engines. So when searching for your Illustrator problems, you might meet artificial intelligence. Also, you might have heard that the use of ChatGPT is advertised to be used by bloggers and journalists and everyone who's writing for inspiration and maybe something more. So you might meet text created by artificial intelligence. So we should know whether we can trust it or not. So let's take a look at it. I've asked ChatGPT some questions. So let's start with the typical question, how do I vectorize an image in Illustrator? And ChatGPT connects vectorizing to the image trace. So first of all, it asks to create a new document. That's the typical step one in every tutorial. And then, of course, we place the image. And then we go to Object Image Trace Make. But this won't bring up the image trace panel, but it will just trace black and white. So we have to get the image trace panel, but not with the steps ChatGPT tells us. But again, in the image trace panel, then it's correct what we can do. And we can select the type of trace and choose from a variety of preset. That's correct. And we can also customize it. That's right. The desired level of detail and complexity, that's also correct. And we can expand that, yes, and then we get the vector image. That's also correct and an important step, because before expanding, we have the live trace, which can be even saved and then again opened, and it's still live. So in order to get paths, we need to expand it. And ChatGPT has that correct. And also, which is interesting, it tells us that we don't get a perfect reproduction. Yeah, that's correct. So next question, how do I draw an octagon? And again, ChatGPT is intelligent and tells us that we select the polygon tool. So it links the octagon to the polygon tool. And then we can click where we want to place the center and set the sides to 8. That's correct. But then it gets messy. So if you want a regular octagon, so Illustrator always draws regular polygons at first. So we can later mess them up, but at first they will always be irregular. And then it tells us something about the star checkbox, which is not present in Illustrator. In Illustrator, we have a star tool, which makes stars, and we have a polygon tool, which makes polygons. So there's no star. And irregular octagons, well, stars are also always regular. So I don't know what it messes up there. And then we have the radius slider. There's also no slider in the start checkbox. So this is a complete mess. And then again, step 7 is correct. So then we have this alternatively, and it mentions a shape tool, which is not there in Adobe Illustrator. We have a shaper tool, but we cannot use the shaper tool to create octagons. You can only use it to create the hexagon, but not for octagons. And also dragging with the shift key with the shaper tool, it's not correct. The shaper tool uses gestures. So this is a complete mess. This alternatively step and step number 5 are a complete mess. So the next one is, how do I draw with the pen tool in 7 steps? So that would be a typical question that I would ask it in order to create a blog post. So that's a nice info by Chat GPT, that it tells me that the pen tool can be challenging at first, but it's a powerful way to create complex shapes and paths. Well, for the complex one, you would actually use more construction methods and not just the pen tool. So here's a step-by-step guide. And again, it starts with a new document, typical blog post, and then we choose the pen tool and press the P shortcut, which is the correct shortcut. And then we can click where to start the path. Yeah, that's correct. Creates the first anchor point. And then we move the mouse and click again, and we get a straight line, which is correct between the 2 points. Then we can add points by clicking and dragging the mouse. And yeah, when we drag, we see handles appear. So it first creates some corner points, and then when clicking and dragging, we get smooth points. And that's kind of weird that it just tells us to create curve points now. So next thing is a nice remark about drawing curve points. It says to click and drag the mouse in the direction we want the path to go, which is important. And especially beginners often don't know how to drag the mouse and in which direction. So that is nice. And also the angle and length of the handles will determine the shape of the curve, which is correct. And then when finishing, we click on the starting point to close the shape. Well, we could also create an open path, and Chat GPT does not mention that. So this is mostly correct, but somewhat missing things. So, and it also realized that and has some additional tips for us. So we can create a smooth curve that are aligned with the direction of the curve. Yeah, but it already mentioned that. And then we can move the points with the direct selection tool, which is correct. It's the white arrow tool, which is mostly mentioned in order to tell people which arrow to use. And then to delete a point or segment of a path, we can select it and press the delete key, which is, well, not what we would want most of the time, because this does not only delete the point, but it opens the path at that place. So that's mostly not what we would want to do. And to add an anchor point, we use the Add Anchor Point tool. Yes, we can do that. Most of the time, you can also use the pen tool to do that, so you don't have to change the tools. But this is the way that the documentation also tells you to do that, because it's a correct way and we can learn the shortcuts later on. And also this one is correct, that we can convert the points later using the control panel. So, but ChatGPT doesn't associate it with a control panel, but locates these buttons in the toolbar. So this is kind of right, but not completely right. So next question I asked is whether the Pathfinder is obsolete because of shapebuilder and live paint. So ChatGPT correctly answers, no, it's not obsolete, which is of course correct, and it has a lot of useful features. Yeah, that's true. And shapebuilder and live paint offer additional functionality. Yeah, that's right. and it can be more efficient for certain tasks. Yeah, most of the time the Pathfinder is actually the one you use for efficiency. So the Shape Builder and Live Paint are more for intuitive working style. So the Pathfinder panel is still a powerful tool for combining, dividing, and intersecting. Yeah, that's right, but the most powerful features are in the bottom row of the panels, and that's not where these functions are. It can be especially useful for creating complex shapes or logos. Yeah, I wouldn't mention logos here, so complex shapes, yeah, that's true, but the specific mention of logos is somewhat limiting. The process of using the Pathfinder panel can be time-consuming. Yeah, learning it can be time-consuming, but using it, it's mostly about efficiency. So using the Pathfinder should be the one-button click solution. And it may be difficult to make changes once the shapes have been combined. Yeah, that's true. Most of the time, using the Pathfinder will be the destructive way of working. But there's one exception. You can use the top bottom row to create compound shapes, but we will get to them later on. So this is mostly true. The Shape Builder tool, on the other hand, allows you to quickly and easily merge, divide, and subtract by simply clicking and dragging. Yeah, it's intuitive. That's correct. So it's the intuitive way. And then we have Live Paint that allows you to fill in areas of a shape with color without needing to create separate shapes or paths. Yeah, that's correct. But that's what the Shape Builder tool does as well. So it can be especially helpful for creating complex illustrations. Yeah, that's all true. Apart from the gradients, but the difference between Shape Builder and Live Paint is that Live Paint is editable, and it's editable even months or years later. So Chat GPT didn't analyze that difference between those two because that's important. And then gradients, yes, you can use them with Live Paint, but it's kind of unintuitive because you can't use the gradient annotator within a Live Paint group. So ultimately, the tool or technique you choose will depend on your specific needs. Yeah, that's correct. And the Pathfinder panel, Shape Builder tool, and Live Paint feature can all be useful in different situations. So yes, that's correct. How can I create a smooth blend in Illustrator? So this tells us the steps to create a blend. And we can first create the object. It can be any shape or path, and they can be different colors or styles. That's correct. And then we can select them and go to Object, Blend, Make. And also the shortcut is correct. Then Illustrator will create the default blend between the objects. That's correct as well. And to adjust it, we go to Object, Blend, Blend Options. That's correct. And the keyboard shortcut is not. So that creates the blend, but does not open the options. In the Blend Options dialog box, you can adjust the spacing, orientation, and steps of the blend. Yeah, that's correct. For a smooth blend, select the smooth color option under spacing. No, that's not correct. Smooth color and spacing are just different options that we can set up, and smooth color is actually the default. But this default does not always create the smooth blend, because that depends on the exact nature of the base object. So sometimes you have to actually select specified steps and then input a higher number of steps. And ChatGPT does not mention that. So, but we click OK to apply this. That's right. So the next thing is right as well. So we can adjust the objects or their positions after creating the blend, we can simply select them and the blend will update. That's correct. We can also create a smooth blend with the blend tool. Yeah, that's right. And we can click on the starting object and then the ending object. That's right as well. And to adjust the blend options, there we get the shortcut to the options, which is just double-clicking the blend tool. And then we have the note that the smoothness of the blend will depend on the complexity of the objects. That's correct. Sometimes the objects are so complex that Illustrator cannot create the smooth blend without us interfering and, getting into it. But that is something that cannot be solved by editing the options most of the time. And the next one is, for best results, use simple shapes and a small number of steps. That is not correct. A small number of steps is important for the efficiency of the file, but for a smooth blend, we need a higher number of steps because that will create the smoothness of the blend. Next questions. We need some tips for creating Celtic rings in Illustrator. And with Celtic rings, the most difficult task is creating the intertwining of those rings. So yeah, Chat GPT tells us this is fun and rewarding. That's right. Once we have finished the task, it's actually fun. But while doing it, creating the intertwining is not a lot of fun. So it tells us to start with a circle, and with the ellipse tool, with the correct shortcut, we can adjust the size and stroke weight. Yeah, that is something we can do. Will be the basic shape of the ring. And then we can divide it with a scissors tool. That's also the right shortcut. And we get equal sections. I don't know why we would need equal sections, but yeah, we can create them. And then we can use it based on the complexity of the Celtic knotwork. I don't know what one has to do with the other, so that's kind of stabbing in the dark what ChatGPT does here. And also to create the knotwork, well, it uses the pen tool to draw them. So the intertwining, it wants to do it manually and tells us how to work precisely with smart guides and to make accurate shapes, which is all correct, but it doesn't create the knotwork. So let's go on here so we can mirror it using the reflect tool and create it symmetrical. And it tells us to make a vertical axis in the reflect tool. So yeah, but horizontal would be okay as well. Then we can group and duplicate it. Yeah, of course we can do that, but it's not really getting us there. So it's working around the important part of creating the intertwining. So then we can get details. We can add shading, highlights, and textures with the gradient tool, Pathfinder panel. Yeah, somewhat. We can also use the Pathfinder panel to get shading, but it's not the go-to tool for that. And other Illustrator tools, yeah, well. And then we can finalize it, adjust the stroke and fill colors, and add any additional details or something. So actually, I would adjust the stroke before adding the shading. So this is somewhat messy. And for the intertwining, of course, the two main tools you could use for that are not mentioned, which is the intertwine feature and which is live paint, of course. So both of them would be important for Celtic rings, but ChatGPT doesn't mention them. So next question, what's the difference between compound paths and compound shapes in Illustrator? And let's face it, this also doesn't get explained correctly in a lot of tutorials. So let's see what Chat GPT can make of it. So compound paths and compound shapes are two different ways to combine two or more shapes into a single object. Yeah, that's correct. And compound shapes is more like a container object. When you see it in the layers panel, you can actually open it and see what's inside. A compound path also somewhat is a container, but it doesn't show like that in the layers panel. So it always shows at just one compound path. Okay, let's take a look at it. So a compound path is a single path made up of two or more subpaths. That's correct. The subpaths can be different shapes, lines, or even text. No, it cannot be text. It cannot be live text. Live text can be in a compound shape, but not in a compound path. They are treated as a single object. Yeah, that's right. And they can be created using the Pathfinder panel under certain circumstances, not always. And by using the Make Compound Shape option, no, of course, it's Compound Path Make in the object menu, or by using the keyboard shortcut Ctrl+8. Yeah, that's right. And then we get the explanation. The overlapping areas of the subpaths are removed. Yeah, that depends on how many paths are there and which fill rule is selected in the attributes panel. And we leave only outer edges visible. Yeah. This means that you can use compound paths to create complex shapes with holes or cutouts in them. Yeah, you can use them for that. Compound shapes, and then we have the explanation, is made up of two or more objects that have been combined using the shapebuilder tool. No, that's wrong. The shapebuilder tool will not create compound shapes. Never. With this tool, you can simply click and drag over the objects to combine them into a single shape. Yeah, you can do that, but it won't create a compound shape without altering the underlying path or subpath. Yeah, but in a compound shape, the underlying paths or subpaths are actually not altered, but when using the shapebuilder tool, you will alter them most of the time. So this is just a mess. When you create the compound shape, the original objects retain their individual path and attributes. That's wrong. They will sometimes keep effects, but when there are different colors and strokes, fill colors and strokes involved, those are not kept, but are treated as a single shape. Yeah, that's right. You can still edit the individual objects. Yeah, you can do that. That's correct. But they cannot be separated once they have been combined. No, you can release them at any time and then you can separate them again. Or you can also select one of the paths and just cut it out of there. So that's not correct, or at least not completely. So the summary: both allow you to combine multiple objects into a single shape. That's right. Compound paths are made of subpaths that are merged together to form a single path. That's also right. And compound shapes are made up of individual objects that retain. No, this is more like, so this would describe a group, but not a compound shape, but are treated as a single shape. Yeah, that's correct again. So I wanted to ask another questions, but then I got an error. So let's leave it with that. I hope you found this interesting, and please tell me if you'd like me to further experiment with Chat GPT.